Hello again. I am back for another episode of BLU Review. Once again, I've just gotten home from work. I'm really tired, but this is probably going to be, it won't be a brief video. I'll say that. But it is one that's been long awaited, at least by me and maybe two or three of you guys out there. Finally going to do a formal review of a film I saw back on January 12th called Eternals. This one was directed by Chloe Zhao. And yeah. She didn't write it all. She didn't come up with the story, the plot. The story's by, I think, a couple of people, two or three or four people who I wasn't familiar with. And then she helped write the screenplay. So, it's really a film that's all over the map. Every angle I've tried to analyze it from, I don't want to say I come up empty handed, but I come up like, what? Like, why were certain choices made? Aesthetic choices, narrative choices, casting choices, directing choices. Yeah. So it's not my least favorite Marvel cinematic universe work out of the 31 that have been released. I do think it's at number 27, though. What's the worst? My worst is The Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton. Yeah. So that's still pretty damn low, considering that recent TV series, all of them landed at fairly high spots on my list. I think Loki now sits at my number 5 overall, and WandaVision's not maybe 6 or 7. So okay, so I did a video where I talked about what we need. We need to talk about the Eternals Part 1. I'm going to scrap the Part 1 off it because there's no need for a Part 2. This is effectively Part 2. I'm not going to do a formal review of the comic because I showed you the volume that I've been reading, the complete collection, the complete Jack Kirby collection of Eternals, which is the original 20 issues, 19 regular issues, and an annual, which I'm selling most of those on my eBay. Make me an offer. The original issue. So now I have them in that beautiful trade I showed you a few videos back. Of course, that's the foundation block upon which I base my appraisal of any adaptation. Unfortunately, I don't think that was the foundation that Chloe Zhao and Kevin Feige used. And it's like with Shang-Chi. They're taking a 70s property, originally a 70s property, that was, admittedly rather niche. You might want to say of its time, maybe not. Definitely of the eccentricities and peculiarities of their concepts and creators. With Shang-Chi, you had Steve Englehart, Jim Starlin, Doug Moench, Paul Gulacy, all highly idiosyncratic creators. With the Eternals, you had pure unadulterated Jack Kirby, aided and abetted by the great Mike Royer, who was this inker letterer, beautiful letterer. And this is kind of came out kind of early in Kirby's return to Marvel in 1976. I think it came out in. I have one of the early issues right here. So I guess this is. I'm going to tell you in 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. 1976. So this came out concurrently probably with the Captain America. This actually is issue number 3. I'm selling this for like $45. It's the first appearance of Cersei. It's not in the greatest condition. Cersei is a key character in the film, though. I've had this since it came out in the stands. My mom bought it for me when I was a teeny tiny tot. Was I even in elementary school? I'm not sure. But anyway, but that's the foundation stone for me. And then, of course, in the 80s, in the 79 to 81, I guess 78 to 80-ish period, there was a couple of years where Roy Thomas was writing The Mighty Thor, and he integrated the Eternals more fully into the Marvel Universe, even though it's obvious from reading Kirby's series that they take place in the Marvel Universe because Shield agents star in one issue, and he makes reference to a bunch of other characters later. And a lot of people are like, well, it's forced on him. He didn't want to do it, but Marvel made him. That's probably true. But let's get real here. I mean, Kirby created Shield. He created the Hulk. Who else do they refer to in the series? Inhumans, I think, and a couple of. He created all those characters. So it's Kirby's world, Kirby's brain. So if Kirby wants to bring in a robot Hulk or Shield agents to the Eternals, he can do whatever he wants to. Those are, in my mind, his characters. Obviously the Eternals, but the other ones too. I mean, I've talked about this endlessly in other videos, so I won't wear you out again on that tip. But anyway, Roy did a series where he had Thor team up with the Eternals, and ultimately the Asgardians and the Eternals tried to stop the Celestials from passing judgment on Earth, which that was the whole kind of undergoing concept of the original series. As the space gods have returned, Kirby based his stuff on Eric Von Daniken and other writers who I'm forgetting, but Eric Von Daniken's the most famous. Chariots of the Gods. Chariots of the Gods was a big theatrical hit in maybe around 75. Kirby kind of piggybacked on it, just the way he did with Commandy off of Planet of the Apes. And that's not to say he's just like ripping people off, because everything that Kirby touched definitely had its roots in something else, but he's not shy about it. He makes it clear, and then he makes it his own. So that's what he did. All these books like Chariots of the Gods, In Search of Ancient Astronauts. There was a documentary called In Search of Ancient Astronauts, narrated by Rod Serling. Like I said, the Chariots of the God film. Von Daniken wrote a bunch of these books, and in later years they were, more or less debunked from an official standpoint. But the fact remains that the seed of Von Daniken's work can't really be debunked. I mean, essentially, he was saying that the ancient civilizations that seemed incredibly advanced for their time, such as the ancient Egyptians and the South American, the Aztecs, the Toltecs, the Mayans, even the beginnings of ancient Sumeria. You could throw Crete in there, even though that's not referred to a lot, and I don't know if Von Daniken refers to it. That was an early, really progressive civilization. But they created these incredible works of art, these incredible monuments like the pyramids and all this kind of stuff, and it just seemed to defy the tools they had at their disposal back then, the machinery they had, which wasn't much, the manpower to build the pyramids. All this has been talked about forever, but it's not just that. It's not like somebody, Van Daniken more or less implies, the aliens came to them and gave them whatever. And that's been said about ancient Atlantis. The aliens came to Earth and pushed the humanity forward evolutionarily. So that's not an idea unique to Kirby. And Von Daniken was kind of grounding it, and he took the monuments and the artwork and the sculptures, the ruins and the artifacts of those cultures, and he noticed how much there are recurring figures that. They probably were gods to these people, but also it looks as though they're using like spacecraft and ray guns and all kinds of advanced tools and shooting rays from their eyes and flying, and as though they were really real. They weren't just gods, and you're kind of like, well, their mythologies don't talk about this kind of technology. So what's the real truth? Is it somewhere in between? So Kirby said, hey, let's do this. Let's say the space gods did come and nudge humanity evolutionarily. And then, I say too much, I apologize. He said they pushed them, forward some, and then they would check on us periodically. And they came in these thing called hosts. So these were the space gods, and he explicitly says these were the space gods that inspired all those, works of art and symbols and characters. I mean, like written characters and hieroglyphs and things of that nature, like same ones Von Daniken talks about. And he even sets issue number 1 and 2 I believe it's in Peru or about thereabouts. And you see the kind of Aztecish art. And Kirby, of course, gives its own little spin, so it looks authentic. But Kirby's basically been creating and drawing space gods since long before Von Daniken did his book. So it's a perfect fit. And Kirby has a character named Ajak who has, supposedly was the basis of, it wasn't Quetzalcoatl. It was a character that I can't remember the name of. Maybe I can't even pronounce his name, but it's an ancient Aztec name. I'll just show you this real quick. So this is Ajak, the guy in the orange helmet, gold and navy blue and purple. So he is the guy who basically guards these monuments because what they are is a celestial. They're the space gods. They're called celestials in Kirby's work. It's a landing pad for them to return to Earth. So Ajax's like the herald, and he has all these people who are essentially descendants of the ancient Aztecs working for him. Some may be Eternals. Ajax is being known as an Eternal. There's Erisham. Now I want you to look at this because we're going to talk a lot about Erisham when we get back to the movie. On his thumb is imprinted the formula to decimate the whole entire planet if he gives it a nay judgment. And he's supposed to be there for 50 years. So, yeah. So what they did way back when was they came to the apes and they experimented on them, and essentially 3 strains emerged. One was humanity. One was the Eternals, who were beyond humanity, who were like godlike, and they inspired the myths of the Greek gods and other pantheons. And what I was trying to say is Ajak himself, within Kirby's story, inspired a particular Aztec mythological figure, and I'm not remembering who it was. And then there was the deviants, and the deviants, they had genetic instability compared to humans and Eternals. Eternals could not be killed. Eternals could not be killed by any conventional means whatsoever. It was beyond a healing factor. They were pretty much indestructible. It's hard to injure them. They can be injured, but they heal. And not like Wolverine, but still, kind of like the Hulk, they just kind of bounce back. The only way they can be killed is if there's a force, usually it's something like cosmic energy that can disperse all of their bodily molecules. And even then, the individual molecules are alive and they can be stored. They didn't in that series, they had not figured out a way to bring them back, in the configuration they were. But I guess if someone could, Celestials could, then they could come back to life conceivably. But all the Eternals, they all could fly. They all were strong, super strong. They were tough. They were well developed physically. The vast majority of them, very Adonis and very god and goddess like. So yeah, and then the humans. Well, we know the humans. That's us. The deviants, though, were cursed with an unstable genome. So they, no 2 deviants are alike, really. So 2 parents would be different from each other, and the kid would look nothing like them. But they would all be, at least in mankind's eyes, distorted. And so the idea is they were the basis for mythological monsters and creatures of legend and lore. The majority of deviants were humanoid. Not all of them were humanoid. I mean, some of them were more animal-like and on all fours or more reptilian, but it's not like in the movie. I'm going to get to that. The movie completely altered the deviants. The deviants could talk. They could reason. They also had advanced technology, a little more advanced than the humans. The Eternals developed basically their mind powers and the cosmic energy from the Celestials. They were the closest to creation to the Celestials of their 3 creations on Earth. The humans were just kind of left to their own devices to develop from, prehistoric era to now. The deviants had advanced technology. They weren't as powerful physically as the Eternals. Some of them were very long-lived, though. Like some of them could live into the thousands of years. It was unusual, but they were more long-lived than humans. So they weren't like immortal like the Eternals. Hence the name Eternals, if you wondered. But the deviants developed this technology early on, and they hated the Celestials. They resented the space gods for their ugliness and their low place on the food chain, so to speak. And they used this technology to attack the second host that came to Earth. This is like 10 or 12,000 years ago, in this storyline. Yeah, what really happened? You never know. And the deviants, the Celestials were like, nah, wave their hands, and boom, there goes Lemuria, which is where they lived. Now, of course, in later Marvel comics, they extended it and said that also sunk Atlantis, though that implication is in Kirby's, but he doesn't explicitly say that. But he does use Lemuria, which had previously been used by Marvel in the Submariner stories, and then also with the Thongor stories adapted from Lynn Carter, which were in the Marvel universe. They're not a Marvel property originally. So, the Deviants kind of piggybacked on that, and then other writers like Roy Thomas reconciled all that continuity-wise. Later writers did a lot of rewriting. We'll get to some of that because a lot of it impacted the film a lot more than anything I'm telling you right now, unfortunately, to the film's detriment, in my opinion. But anyway, the where I'm getting with this is that so the Deviants were not destroyed, but a lot of them were wiped out. Lemuria was wiped out. They went underwater. They went into mountains and caves and kind of hid out, wondering if they could ever avenge themselves. But how could you? You can't defeat a Celestial. They're like 100 feet tall or whatever, and they're totally implacable. None of them have any, their helmets. None of them have human features, anthropomorphic features on their helmets, and they are humanoid. They all wear this armor, which maybe they contain just energy inside, cosmic energy. Who knows? I'm speculating off Kirby's original work here, of course. I'm not the more recent whatever retcons that have been done endlessly with the Eternals. But the way Roy Thomas wrote them is, yes, they are implacable. They don't just blow up Lemuria. They can't just doom a planet. They can kill gods, and they pretty much effortlessly destroy all of the Asgardian gods, except for Thor, who's spared by Gaia, Mother Earth, who was his mother. And I read a thread about how, and they didn't go with this in the MCU. In the MCU, they went with the idea that Frigga is his mother. But actually, Frigga was Odin's wife, and Odin, like Zeus, was not faithful to her. He procreated elsewhere, not to the extent Zeus did. But Odin was the father of a lot of the main gods. Now, a lot of that changed in the Marvel version. A lot of those characters are not Thor's siblings. But anyway, Gaia, in the Norse mythology, she was called Jord, Jord, and she was the Earth goddess. Same as Gaia in other mythology. And so Marvel combined the character Mother Nature / Gaia that they had introduced in Doctor Strange. I sold her first appearance not long ago for about $20. They combined her with Jord, and they revealed that because apparently, according to Roy, Thor never knew his mother. That's why we never saw his mother back then in the old comics. She saved Thor. She drove off the Celestials and gave them these other characters called young gods so they could learn from and learn about humanity. Now, that plot point is adapted sort of in this movie, and we'll get to that. So that was the end of that. And in the mid-'80s, there was an Eternals miniseries, 12 or maxi series, they called them then, limited series, 12 issues, written by Peter B. Gillis, drawn by Sal Buscema. It was serviceable art. It wasn't him at his best. It wasn't him at his worst. I don't think he was the logical choice, but I think it was fine. Near the end, the series really started to wane, and Buscema's art kind of got rushed, and then Paul Ryan came in, and he's not a bad artist. I think he's deceased now, so I'm not trying to talk ill of the dead, but Ryan's stuff is kind of pedestrian. It's kind of, it's accessible, but it does the job, but to me, it's just kind of bland. He was the wrong replacement for Sal. Sal's at least dynamic. And there was some trouble with Marvel with Peter Gillis, and so Walt Simonson had been writing and drawing Thor to much success. took over the writing on the last 3 issues. Now, Simonson can be a really good writer, but I didn't like his take on Thor. And ironically, well before he ever, took over Thor, he took over Thor about 3 years after Roy Thomas and company wrapped up the Celestial saga. And the Asgardians did get reborn, by the way. Nothing is permanent in Marvel. But the beginning of Roy's cycle in Thor with the Eternals was in a Thor annual. And Raul Simonson penciled it, and Ernie Chan inked it. Great story to me, and it took place 1,000 years ago. So you saw the third host coming to land. So some of the characters, they're all from the comics, except this character Veraco, who turned out to be Icarus' son. Now he does get destroyed, and his atoms scattered, so he's effectively dead, as an Eternal can die. So Simonson, but he failed in that series, in my opinion. A lot of the series is focusing on loose ends from the Eternals, appearances in their comic and in Thor, and some new characters are introduced. A notable one is Phastos. All the Eternals, generally, not all of them, but most of them were based, on like Greek gods, their names and their basic powers. And of course, then the explanation within the story is those characters, the Eternals, were the real inspiration for the Greek myths and such. So it's kind of Philip was a farmer-like. And so they went ahead and introduced a character, who was the inspiration for Vulcan or Hephaestus in mythology, and they called him Phastos. So a lot of them have similar names, like Icarus, Icarus. And yes, his name was pronounced Icarus until the movie came out. I mean, there might be some contemporary Marvel writers who pronounce it Icarus in their head, but the first time you actually hear Icarus officially as the pronunciation of this character's name is in this movie. And I thought that was stupid, because it was a riff on Icarus. It wasn't supposed to be literally Icarus. It wasn't spelled the same. So, yeah, Icarus, Icarus, Makari, Mercury, Athena, Zoras, Zeus. Sprite was kind of a trickster god, that kind of an amalgamate of different characters. Ajax was, basically a riff on, Aztec gods and such. And so Phastos was the, and Circe was for Circe, Sersi in the comic. The inspiration for Circe, Circe, the sorceress in ancient Greek mythology, turned Odysseus's crew, I think, into pigs. Now, in the Kirby book, she actually transmutes all matter. She can change people. For some reason in the movie, her powers are limited for thousands of years, and she can only affect non-animate matter. And then in the movie, suddenly her powers get unlocked, and that's a whole nother convoluted plot point. Yeah. So anyway, I mentioned Phastos because he's a character in the movie. A couple other characters in the movie from the old comics were Kingo Sunan, who they just called Kingo in the movie. They changed him for the worst. And Druig, who was like the Loki kind of character of the Eternals comic. He was really the most closest to an evil Eternal. In the movie, I wouldn't call him evil at all, but he's definitely strong-willed. He's one of the few characters I really kind of connected with on any level. So, wow. Okay, so anyway, since then, there was tons of little minor retcons and miniseries. Eternals never became commercially successful as its own property. And so Neil Gaiman was offered to work for Marvel during the Bill Jemas, Joe Quesada regime on Marvel, where a lot of people who never wanted to work for Marvel before were being brought in and just given free reign to do their best work. Like Bruce Jones and Grant Morrison, and there was a whole ton of people, Mike Grell and Stuart Eminon, and a lot of people who had just never worked for Marvel. They tried to get Alan Moore to no avail. Peter Milligan came to Marvel, and Neil Gaiman said, "I'll do the Eternals because it's mythological, it's storytelling." And he posited a story where the Eternals had all lost their memory. And had to kind of awaken and find out who they were and find each other. There's a lot of lot of that in this movie. I think that's a framework they used in the movie, but it's not the sole major framework literally that it was that I mentioned in my We Need to Talk About Eternals video. I assumed that's what they were finding each other. They were remembering who they were. Well, they never forgot who they were. They were simply dispersed for a long, long time and then reunite. So iterations after Gaiman of just retcon. And of course, the biggest retcon Marvel did in the 80s was revealing that the characters on Titan, the Saturn's moon, such as Thanos and his brother Eros and father Mentor, that they were Eternals. In Starlin's book, they originally actually were related to Zeus and the Greek gods. So later that was retconned. So that's how come we get that, they're Eternals. Now, this is never mentioned in the Thanos material in the MCU at all. However, at the end of this movie, there's tons of spoilers. At the end of this movie, Eros does appear. He's also known as Star Fox. And he's an Eternal. So he's kind of like a cousin of some of these characters. They did write one major character out of the movie. Hold on one second. I'll be right back. You still with me? They wrote one major character out of those, Zurus, the Zeus-like leader of the Eternals, the Prime Eternal. Athena was his daughter. And it's a Zeus-Athena-like relationship. Zeus is not a character in the movie, not mentioned, nothing. And as Zeus died, Zurus the Eternal is not in the movie. Zurus died when Thor and the Eternals attacked the Celestials. But he wasn't brought back. And that's part of the miniseries in the 80s is picking up the pieces without Zurus. So he's not in the, and not only that, but recent Marvel comics revealed that the Eternals can't procreate. So the whole familial thing, because they have families and children and cousins and brothers and sisters, that's all just name only. I don't understand that, but I don't like it. But anyway, so in the movie, then you would think, well, if they just went ahead and just continued the basic idea, then Athena would be the Prime Eternal, but the Prime Eternal is Ajak. And in that sense, they changed the function of the Prime Eternal. Ajak was the go-between between Eternals and Celestials. Now, that hasn't changed, but that's now the job of the Prime Eternal, instead of someone who rules the city of Olympia, way in the mountains, which, of course, supposedly, but under Kirby, supposedly influenced Mount Olympus. Roy Thomas made it, the Greek gods and the Eternals both exist on the same planet. But the movie eschews so much of this. It's hard to describe. So let me just get down to the movie and what the deal is after a half hour. So I'll probably another half hour on this. So if you want to pause this and use the restroom or whatever, that's cool. Or you could use the restroom and come back. You might not miss much. Anyway, but this Eternals plot is, they really bent themselves into a pretzel not trying to adapt this. Because like I said, I don't think Figa, as he did with Shang-Chi, I don't think he felt this was relevant. The Kirby's work was relevant to a contemporary audience. He's wrong, of course. Maybe, I don't know. So he gets Chloe Zhao, and she's an up and coming kind of art housey Asian American director, and she had a story she wanted to tell, and Kirby be damned. Fuck Kirby, fuck Roy Thomas, Peter B. Gillis. She's going to tell her own story. She's not going to worry about these silly old comic books. They were kind of cheesy, right? She wants to do an art movie. She wants to do the first MCU art movie. One thing she said was, I want to film in natural locales instead of all this CGI background. So that was kind of cool. There is some nice photography. Some people have called it brilliant and breathtaking. I personally wouldn't quite go that far. It's great, but I can think of cinematographers a lot better than this guy who shot it. But it's good. I can think of some MCU movies that look better, actually. But it still looks great, and the natural environs look good. Unfortunately, it spent so much money traveling the world finding these natural locales that they didn't have much money left over for the extensive CGI. And this is probably has the weakest CGI of any MCU movie since The Incredible Hulk, which I think had terrible CGI overall. There have been some duff scenes sprinkled throughout the movies. Usually, that big third act where all kinds of creatures and superheroes and villains are fighting and flying and jumping around, and like in Endgame and Black Panther, and that's sometimes when the effects look dodgy. Black Panther final battle was, they could have worked on it. They could have tweaked it a little more, maybe a lot more. In this one, they needed to not just tweak it, but maybe overhaul it completely. I'm not saying there aren't some nice visuals and some nice effects, but that look really cool and look real. But this is kind of a step backward for Marvel effects wise. Even from Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi had wonderful CGI and wonderful production design and art direction. This movie really doesn't have any production and art direction. I mean, it is in natural locales, and it's mostly people wearing ordinary clothes and talking, and then they'll sparse in these overlong CGI riddled battles and whatever, and it's hard to tell what's happening. You get whiplash watching it, and it's kind of like a really bad video game. And there's video games that definitely better. So many things wrong with this movie. I'm trying to think of something right about it. We'll get to the right. So here's the concept of the movie. So the Eternals, the initial press for the movie claimed the Eternals were only 7,000 years old. And I'm like, what? They're like eternal. So that turned out to be misinformation or maybe disinformation. And the Eternals themselves, I think, believed they were 7,000 years old. Maybe. Well, it's kind of weird because they don't remember anything before 7,000 years. So, also, Olympia, they believe is a planet they come from. So it's not on Earth. Eternals were not born on Earth. They were not an experiment by the Celestials on the primitive apes and early proto-humans. Neither were the deviants. And the Celestials didn't create humanity either. Now, the Celestials did create the Eternals and deviants, but not on Earth, not as a matter of accelerated evolution. So that whole idea that I went through painstakingly behind these texts, such as the Von Daniken text and the original Kirby comics, and similar kinds of science fiction and fantasy films and such, is that all that's gone. So the Celestials do not advance the planet's evolution and then check on it every few thousand years or whatever, and to judge it, see how it's coming along. Okay, all that's completely gone. Wow. Okay, so basically, what the Eternals do, they're sent to Earth in this ship. Doesn't look like a Jack Kirby design. It looks kind of like the monolith from 2001. I mean, maybe that's a nod to the fact Kirby did a really cool 2001 comic book adaptation, but except instead of vertical, it's horizontal, it's flat. They're really dull. And this is called the Domo, which is named after a character named Nomo in the comics that they didn't use. Domo helped Zoras run Olympia, basically. So yeah, no Zoras, no Domo. So yeah, so they come to Earth, and they do. This is where the connection with what I just said they got rid of. The connection basically is the Eternals helped early humans, gave them some ideas, some culture, and yeah, they were mistaken for the Greek gods in legends. But the Celestials did not, bump them genetically, humans. Eternals kind of shepherded them. And that's not true of the comic book. The Eternals' job was not to shepherd humanity. The Eternals' job was to be Eternals. They retreated away from humanity. I mean, they did influence humanity and inspire them with their feats and myths and stories of their battles with the deviants through the millennia, but they didn't come down and help them grow crops and all this other stuff. I mean, that's not a terrible interpretation, but I don't know. The character who loved the humans the most and wanted to shepherd the humans along in the movie is Cersei. So they completely changed her character. She does have black hair and wear a green outfit, and she does transform inanimate matter instead of all matter. She doesn't have the rest. She's very tough, like hard to hurt, like the Eternal. She can't fly. Um, she doesn't. She's not mischievous like Cersei. Kirby's Cersei was really kind of a not to be trifled with character. Very outspoken, very mischievous, very sometimes cruel. Uh, kind of had antipathy toward humanity, but kind of fell in love with a human professor named Holden, and kind of a stodgy intellectual guy, seemingly her opposite. There's elements of that in this story. Instead of Holden, Cersei's human consort is Dane Whitman, which was her boyfriend in the Avengers comic in the 1990s, aka the Black Knight. So in the Black Knight and Cersei serving together in the Avengers, they did have an affair. So they kind of mushed all that together. I'm fine with that part. But anyway, yeah, they kind of helped humanity some. And then, their main goal is to battle the deviants, ostensibly to keep the deviants from killing humans and wreaking havoc upon the earth. And so they got to where they finally destroyed all the deviants. And this was about, this is the thing, the dates in the movie change a lot too. Because supposedly they killed all the deviants, I guess. Okay, so they came to Earth 7,000 years ago. They killed all the deviants by, which think about that, 7,000 years ago. They portray them coming to people like, they're not cavemen, but they're pretty primitive. They're a lot more primitive than ancient Sumeria or Babylonia or Crete. Maybe that's because that's just where they landed. I don't know. But they're not like cavemen, and they can speak and everything. But but then their mission is over when the deviants are destroyed. I think that's supposed to be 2,000 years ago. Later in the movie, Druig says something about we've been doing such and such for 7,000 years, and he's referring to the last 2,000-year events. And then there's other fudging of the dates and contradictions all over the place about what took place when and how much time. And then it gets more confusing at the end because their answer to Twist, they rely on a tired and trusty Twist. Everything you thought you knew is false. It is all a lie. I'm getting all these insane notifications. I'm really sorry. I don't know what the hell. Oh my gosh. Okay, hold on. All right. Sorry about that. People mean well, but anyway, they don't know I'm recording this. So, yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of weird. Yeah, so the ending is kind of the twist of, no, none of this was true either. Here's what really happened, which Marvel has done to the Eternals in the comic books quite a lot in the last maybe 10, 15 years. So I guess that's something they retained. And yeah, so when they finished the deviants, they went to live among the humans. They didn't lose their memories, as in Gaiman, though that happened in Gaiman's story in the early 21st century, though not 2,000 years ago. But and I might be wrong about the 2,000 years. It might have been only 1,000 years or whatever that they've been apart. I don't know. And so they're dispersed. So you have Cersei, you have Icarus, based on Icarus. You have Phastos that I mentioned. You have Sprite, and Sprite is a female, kind of an androgynous, young, barely pubescent, prepubescent to pubescent female. In the comics, Sprite was kind of a Peter Pan-like character. Male, but very Peter Pan-like. And so they actually translated that character visually pretty well. Wearing green, having the red hair, and having that general kind of look. And also being kind of an asshole, like in the comics. They got her right more than some of the other characters, because she's actually, in the comics, the original Sprite, he actually was the villain in the Neil Gaiman series, and Zurus killed him. That was all retcon too, right? So there's Sprite, And then there's Frostos. There's Kingo. And then there's Athena. And then there's Gilgamesh. So now Gilgamesh is a character who in Kirby's comic was called the Forgotten One. And he was supposed to be the basis of all these legendary strongmen like Gilgamesh, like Hercules, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe Samson, Machista, all those kind of characters that you see in Peplum films. And that's the Forgotten One. When Kirby took over, Kirby had left him with a costume that the Celestials gave him that covered his face and whole body, metallic. And they took him aboard one of their ships. You never really saw what happened to them or what they had in store for him. If the comic had not been canceled, I'm sure Kirby would have gotten back to them because Kirby wrote his stories with long form, in mind. So, Roy named him Thor. Roy named him within the comic book Thor. He named him Hero because he embodied all the heroes. I thought that was kind of corny. And then some other writers got a hold of him. It might even have been Walt Simonson. I can't remember. During a particularly uninspired Avengers lineup shakeup, and called him Gilgamesh. And so this is the same character. He's Gilgamesh. So from then on, he was known as Gilgamesh. In this, they call him Gilgamesh. No play on his name, a la Kirby or anything. He's just Gilgamesh, same guy. Blah blah blah. Except he's played by a Hawaiian Chinese guy named Don Lee. So that's fine. We'll get to that. There's Makari is in there. She's on Earth. Druig. Yeah, I think that's everybody now. So what's the deal with these characters? Okay, Cersei lives in London and is dating Dane Whitman. She seems pretty cool. Then you find out that this Icarus cat was her lover for centuries. They were married in a ceremony in India or somewhere centuries ago. But then he left her. You find out that Sprite has been tagging along with Dane and Cersei intermittently. You also find out Sprite has had this millennia-long crush on Icarus, but of course not being sexually mature, even though she's thousands of years old. It's pretty fucking awkward, especially when he was married to her friend Cersei. So that's the first little cluster of characters. I think there's 10 Eternals. Gradually, you start to meet them. It's a slow process because they keep stopping to have these stupid fights that look kind of cheesy, but overall. But so yeah, we meet Kingo, and instead of being in the comics, Kingo was a Kingo Sunan. May or may not have been his birth name as an Eternal, but that was the name he went by. He was Japanese. He was an Asiatic-looking Eternal. So he lived in Japan for centuries, and he was a samurai. And then in modern day, he played samurais in Shanbara movies. It was pretty cool. So they decided, we've got to mix up and make everything multicultural and more diversity. It's like, well, hold on. He's already Asiatic. We got this. Kirby took care of this. You don't need it. It's like, nope. We're going to make him Indian looking, and he's still going to be named Kingo, just Kingo. And he's going to play in Bollywood movies that are real cheesy, and he's a real narcissist and grandiose and kind of cowardly. And it's like, wow. Okay. So then we move on to Athena. Athena was the fiercest warrior of the Eternals. That's true more or less in the comics. They called her a warrior goddess in the movie, but I mean, really, of course, she's based on Athena. But Athena was the goddess of wisdom. Now, it's true in Kirby's Athena, she is more of a warrior. Now, her character, even more so than Sprite, actually does somewhat resemble the comic book character. The blonde hair, the golden armor, and headpiece, and spear. And Angelina Jolie does a pretty good job with her. What she's got to work with, she does a really good job. In the comic books, Athena was a warrior, and she kind of had a racist attitude towards deviants, but she was having an affair on and off through the centuries with the longest living deviant, Crow. And in the 20th century, in the old comics, he brings her to modern, New Lemuria or whatever they call their new hangout. And she's kind of repulsed by their violence and activities. This more or less says this in the dialogue, but she's fascinated and she's willing to try to build a bridge. To me, that was a brilliant stroke on Kirby. The interracial relationship, Athena being warlike and seeing them as violent, but then going, well, yeah, I'm warlike, they're violent. Well, okay, I like Crow, even though he's evil, kind of. You know what I'm saying? To me, there were layers there. So none of that's in the movie. Okay. So just to let you know. So yeah, Athena looks the part, has the same basic power set, but she's not the Prime Eternal after Zoras because there's no Zoras, and the function of the Prime Eternal has been altered. There's no affair with Crow. She starts to get this thing they call the Madwiri, and they kind of spell it like a Celtic word, and I can't remember the spell. Lots of Y's. Welsh, Celtic, I don't know. That wasn't in the comics that I'm aware of. But apparently the weight of all the memories of their past selves. Now, that's the thing is that, there's a point where they realize that they're not just 7,000 years old. They were recycled. So they've been doing this to planets all through the millennia. We ultimately find out it's millions of years. And what this is, I'm going to get to. Like I said, not the same missions. These characters don't have the same missions as in the comics. They do have similar missions to some of the more very recent retcons, which I don't care for. We'll get to that. Hopefully it won't be hours long. So, yeah, so by the weight of those memories, they start to kind of go mad, kind of like Alzheimer's or mental illness, mental breakdown. So she's kind of got this intermittent madness, and when she gets like that, she attacks everyone, including her fellow Eternals, and she's hard to stop because she's the greatest fighter. Gilgamesh is the only one who can get through to her, and so he kind of stays with her when they split, and they're told, okay, my Ajax says, your mission is over. I've been talking to Arishem. We'll get to that. And because he's the lead Celestial, he's who they kind of, she reports to. You don't see any other Celestials in this movie, by the way. You've seen glimpses of them in some other movies like the Guardians of the Galaxy, and in those they somewhat resemble the Kirby character. So this one you only meet Arishem, and he very, very, very vaguely resembles a Kirby Celestial, and I'll get to that. I showed you what he looked like in the comics. I think he's pretty awesome. But no, they couldn't go with that. So yeah, Ajax disperses them. They all go their own way, as I've said. And Gilgamesh stays with Athena for all that time. And they kind of settle somewhere. He takes care of her and her, ongoing on and off mental woes. And then you have Druig, and the last battle with the Deviants, I believe, took place. Am I getting this right? I want to say, yeah, there was kind of a contentious thing with Druig because he has this power to possess other people. And his whole thing is humanity is destroying itself. Why can't I possess them all and give them peace on Earth? And Ajax like, no, they must, follow the way. She's got this cool accent. That's Salma Hayek plays Ajax. Ajax is now a female in this too. She's one of the best, if not cast-wise, she's the best thing about the movie by far, in my opinion. And she does have the Aztec Toltec kind of ish thing in the blue and gold armor. It looks way different kind of than what I showed you, but evocative of it. And she's an actress who's descended from like the indigenous South American peoples, and Hispanics are like the Aztecs and those races before the Spanish came and raped them and took over and gave them their names. But yeah, so I thought that was good casting, and she's terrific in it. Plus, it's nice to see an MCU character, female character, actually has an incredible curvy body and isn't slim. You know what I mean? It's like, whoa, she looks like a woman. Don't know if they'll continue with that strand. I kind of doubt it, but it was nice to see. And Salma's 55, and she still looks terrific, and is a thick woman, more thick than when she was younger. She's always been curvy, but now she's really kind of filled out. Sorry, I'm being lustful, but yeah, she was great in this, and just she embodied this character's wisdom. That was her thing. That's why she's the Prime Eternal. because she has the connection with Erisham, and she has this wisdom. The Ajax in the comics was a little more reckless, and he was kind of blindly devoted to the Celestials too. That they did translate that, and they were his kind of he was kind of their connection, their hookup on Earth. Um, but Ajax's character is more sagely. I mean, Hayek's Ajax is more kind of sagely than the Kirby version. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm saying it's different, but at least it was good. Um, so Druid can possess these people, and during their last battle with Celestials, Druid wants to take this area where they had the battle, and he wants to possess all the people and make everybody friendly. And they're like, hell no, and there's a lot of contention, and they're like, okay, the mission's over, go your own ways. And Druid stays in that place. It's like a village, I would say, I guess in South America. It's all Hispanic people, small villages, and he controls all of them. They're like his slaves, but they live in harmony. And he likes it there, he likes the control. And at first you think it's kind of an evil thing, and in a way it is, obviously stealing their free will. But Druid's not completely wrong about a lot of things he says, because Druid, despite the fact he possesses people and everything, he actually does believe to an extent in free will, as in the Eternals having free will away from the Celestials. So he's one of the few characters that kind of has an arc to him, a growth pattern, a learning curve, kind of shades of gray, and some villainy and some heroism. He does some pretty heroic things in the sense that he gets things done. He can be ruthless, but he usually does the right thing ultimately. So I liked him. Barry Keogh is the last name, who played in Killing of a Sacred Deer, which I didn't care for that much, but he was in that, and he's very young, but he's one of the most decorated and renowned actors, in the United Kingdom, which I didn't know until recently. And there's rumors he might be in Batman, but I don't know. So that's all your. Oh, Makari is the last character. Oh, well, Phastos. They find Phastos in the present day. What Phastos had done, he invents things. He designs things with his cosmic power. In the comics, he was kind of warlike. Like he built weapons primarily, and he killed deviants. So he's not like that. In this, he's more creative, like an architect, an engineer, but he does it in this kind of cosmic energy, mystical, magical kind of thing. Now he's black as in the comics, but he's gay. So that's a new development. And his character in the modern day kind of resembles Curtis Mayfield. He's got a beard and similar glasses and hat, and I'm kind of like, oh, wow, okay. I don't know if that was delivered or not, but so Phastos, he marries a younger, obviously, much younger, light-skinned black guy, and they adopt a little girl. And I don't know if either of their sperm, I guess Eternals can't procreate in this movie, so I guess it would be the other guy's DNA if either of them. It should just be straight out adopted. So he's got a domestic family in America going on. And you would think a guy that lived that long and he was gay, you would think he would have settled down much earlier in a country that was friendly to gay marriage earlier than America was. But oh well, we live, we learn. Yeah. And finally, we've got Makari, who she's got super speed, and she's pretty durable and tough. Now, she, for some odd reason, is deaf. That's not in the comics. I'm not really sure why she's deaf. And a friend of mine said, I wonder why the Celestials would make a deaf Eternal. For what purpose? Humility? I don't know. It's weird. But I think, again, it's that inclusion thing and that diversity. It's a little out of control at this point, more or less. But her actress, the actress who plays her, is I can't tell what ethnicity she is. She could be Hispanic, she could be Asiatic, she could be Polynesian, she could be Indian. It's hard to tell. She's a good actress, though. She doesn't talk, obviously. I'm assuming the actress herself must be deaf, a deaf mute, and that's why they went with her, keeping her deaf. I don't know. They're like, we need a deaf speedster woman of a certain ethnicity, and they found her. But she's a likable character. She's very fast, like I said. She is very likable. She smiles a lot. She has good energy. She reads a lot of books. Since she can do everything fast, she has mounts of, tons of books everywhere, a giant library, and she's read them all. She's still reading. That was a cool wrinkle to her character. Again, very different than the Makari in the comics. So, and I'm still calling him Makari, but in the movie they called the character Makari. But other than that name and the speedster, that's it. They're nothing alike. So eventually these characters gather together, and when they gather together, it's because they find out the deviants are back. And Icarus saves Cersei and Dane and Sprite from some deviants in London. And that's when it all starts, the search for the others. And they find out that Ajax is dead. They find her body. She's deceased. Again, they can die in conventional ways, or, not like, ordinary human ways, but if deviants sink their claws into them and go into their artery or their head, they can, or their heart, they can kill them. So the deviants, none of them seemingly are intelligent. They're these giant, they all kind of look alike. They're just giant, animal-like, lizard-like, reptilian, slightly Giegerish looking creations that are not nearly that interesting. And they jump around and, they're kind of like velociraptors or something. And none of them have anything to say. They're just as pure evil. So that's what you're led to believe. So we go down this whole track, and finally they start dropping clues. Now, I knew going into the movie what the first twist was, but I was surprised at how unsubtle it was. Like, you may not have got it in Act 1. But in Act 2, they're kind of telegraphing it. They're doing that kind of thing where a character stops and he's listening to the others as they have their plan. And the plan is essentially they find out their real purpose. Well, part one. Then later they find out more real truth. There's like layers like an onion. The first thing they find out is the deviants send the Eternals to safeguard the Earth and shepherd the human population so that they would grow and there'd be tons of life on the Earth, and that they put a celestial seed in the core of the Earth to nurture there. And when it came to fruition, it would be born. It would be called the emergence. It would absorb all that energy of all those creatures, and it would destroy that planet completely. And they've been doing this for many, 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 many millennia. They say near the end, millions of years. It's just they only remember their lives for certain periods of time. And we'll get into that too. But the mid-weary is Athena suffers from is a result of the weight of all those accrued memories that are now stored in her subconscious. And she can't access them, and they're driving her mad. That was interesting, I guess. But I did it again. I'm sorry. So that's kind of the mission, and fighting off the deviants was to keep humans safe so they could harvest. They could be harvested. Well, I mean, they could grow, be cultivated, and then be harvested when the emergence happened. So Ajax like, I've served Erisham faithfully for aeons. I don't want to go with this plan. And Cersei doesn't either, because she's always loved humans. So then you start seeing Icarus, and he's got these funny expressions, and the camera will hold on him. He's like not talking when you think he should be right in the middle of the conversation. There's a lot of things about Icarus in this movie to dislike. First of all, the actor is extremely boring. He's just like walking cardboard. He's like the most generic brunette white guy you can imagine, which is weird because they've got all the multi-ethnic characters. Unlike in the comics where he's, a guy with long blonde hair, like Thor, he's Mr. Clean Cut, and not a very good actor. His accent is fine, but Druig and he both actors have like a Scottish or an Irish kind of brogue. But Druig, you can kind of understand what he's saying. No, you can. He's a good speaker. The other actor, whose name I don't know or care about, is he's not a good speaker. He's not a good at elocution. So he puts it all together, and it's like, okay, dude, slow down. But he doesn't talk much, thankfully. But when he does, it's pretty painful. And I never buy him as some kind of romantic stud that Cersei would fall in love with unless she's a moron. He has really no good qualities, but what's hammered into us repeatedly is that he's the most powerful Eternal, like by far more powerful than all of them combined almost. That's nothing like the comic books. So he still has the same powers as in the comics, which are flight, super strength, can't be hurt, and laser, eyes, beams of energy from his eyes. But he's like Superman. He's more like Superman. He's a lot like Zack Snyder's Man of Steel Superman. And a friend of mine told me that Chloe Zhao had mentioned her admiration for Man of Steel and maybe that being an influence on her Icarus. And it's pretty obvious. Like the Man of Steel in the Man of Steel movie, he's very arrogant, apathetic. Again, a very bland actor. Now, I mean, this guy makes Henry Cavill, as far as thespian skills, this guy makes Henry Cavill look like fucking John Hurt. But, and Cavill to me is an awful actor. That's just my opinion, sorry. But this guy's infinitely worse. He's just not even, he barely is there, except you can't avoid him because he's always jumping around and hitting things and booming and lasers out of his eyes and kicking ass. And everybody's like, ooh, he's so powerful. And even though the other Eternals have skill sets that in their own right are as powerful and in some ways more formidable than his, because he's a stupid character. And you find out kind of, I guess, within story why he's stupid. Icarus wasn't stupid in the comics. It's because he's like a blind lapdog to the Celestials. And the reason he's doing these long camera takes, like they're telegraphing, they're foreshadowing that Icarus isn't down with Ajax and Cersei's plan here. And most of the other characters are on board. Phastos, obviously, he's got a human family, and Cersei's got a human boyfriend, and Druig's got his little village of slaves or whatever. But Sprite is loyal to Icarus. She doesn't care about humans because she can't ever grow up. Man, wah, 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 wah. Her character's a whiny malcontent. And that's from the Gaiman story, so I guess in a way that's legit. There's not that kind of angst in the Sprite character in the Kirby stuff, but in the Gaiman, yeah, there is. And and like Gaiman's Sprite, she is a traitor to the Eternals. She'll follow Icarus because basically she wants to fuck Icarus, but in good conscience she can't fuck him. So if they're that old chronologically, and they don't really live within human laws except as they choose to, and she's kind of just in the cusp of pubescence, and they can't have kids. Why can't she try to seduce him? I'm just saying, if it was an R-rated movie, I would go there. I wouldn't necessarily make it happen, but I would bring that up as, okay, we're going to go in this direction. She's going to try to make this happen. But she's either not that smart, not that planning, calculating, not that impassioned or horny. I don't know. She's, again, kind of her power seems to be quips and sarcasm. And I think Phastos even says that to her. I think he says it to her. He does say something that we don't need your sarcasm. Yeah, so she's on Icarus' side. Kingo also is loyal to Icarus, so he's kind of like, yeah, I love being a superstar, but I'm getting kind of jaded. Yeah, maybe we could go on killing humanity. Arisham's never wrong. But the majority of Athena and Gilgamesh are kind of neutral, but they both kind of come around to like, yeah, we're gonna do this. Unfortunately, Gilgamesh gets killed about halfway through the movie by a deviant. And Ajax is already dead. Well, so then we get to the truth within the truth. As they try to stop this emergence by all these different ways. I won't go all into one is this thing called the Unimind, which is from the Kirby comic. And in the movie, Phastos comes up with the name. And he's like, we're going to all combine our minds and our powers, and then we'll be powerful enough to stop Icarus from allowing the emergence to happen. And when he names it, all the other characters are like, the Unimind, that's so corny and stupid. I mean, it's one of those Marvel lame humor things. It's like, it's not really funny. And it's just weird seeing a concept created by the guy who created the Marvel Universe and then mocking him through the characters. Like Kevin Feige thinks it's stupid, or most likely Chloe Zhao is like, Unimind is stupid. Yeah, we can retain the idea, but we've got to have the characters make fun of it. That'll make it more realistic, and draw attention to how cheesy it is. And they do that a lot in certain Marvel MCU things. Like in the Netflix shows, I got so sick of Rosario Dawson's Claire Temple being like, what's an Iron Fist? Or you met a dragon? Or what's that? That's stupid. And she's supposed to be, I guess, the disbelieving audience. And, it's like, if you're ashamed of the source material, it's going to be a problem. I get having a character like Claire to do that, because that was a very grounded sub-universe. But this is the MCU. I mean, after Endgame, come on. Why is everything so hard to believe? Why is everything so mocked? And, we're back to that, and it's so stupid. So as we hurtle towards the end of things, then we find out another horrible truth is that, Icarus killed Ajax. And they show a flashback that Icarus went to Ajax, and she was living on this farm in South Dakota and looked like a cowgirl. And she's really cool. That's really her scene to really shine at more length. And he has learned that there were some deviants. Like, he gets her to meet him somewhere, and he wants to show her something. And of course, she does it. And it's like in all this frozen ice, and these deviants are emerging. Apparently, they were trapped in the ice flow or something, and that's some reason the Eternals couldn't detect them. They needed a Cerebro thing to detect deviants. In the comics, they may have, and I'm not remembering. Deviant alert. But they didn't, because this plot device dictated they come back, but were undetected for all this time. So basically, literally, Icarus throws Ajax to the deviants to be killed. And apparently Ajax has no powers other than healing herself. And she, she's tough, and she's wise, and she's immortal, but she has no other powers at all. Like, she can't defend herself against the deviants. I don't know how she battled them before. I guess she was their leader, pointed, hey, there's a deviant, zap him, Icarus, with your eyeballs. But they kill her, and it's horrible. It's a tragic scene, because I really loved Salma in that character, in that role. And, they really pound home, because they've been, foreshadowing it for an hour and a half, that Icarus is just a piece of shit. That he's, more or less by most metrics, that he's evil. He's a slave to, authoritarian power. A total opposite of a hero. And yet, because he flies around and he's super strong and he shoots beams from his eyes, they're in awe of him, and Sprite has a crush on him. In a way, it's like Homelander and The Boys. A total dickhead with all this ultimate power, but really not that bright and really not a good person. And I'm not saying Icarus is as all-out sadistic and horrible as Homelander, but he's about as powerful, even some similar power sets, really. That could have been an influence on Zhao, too. I can't remember when The Boys came out relative to the beginning of writing that script for the Eternals. For Eternals, sorry, there's no "the" in the title in the movie. Yeah, I'm getting kind of sick of talking about this, to be honest. It's kind of a depressing movie, and I don't mean in a depressing movie like In a Glass Cage or something, or The Elephant Man. I don't mean that kind of depressing. I'm cool with that kind of depressing. It's depressing because there's a malaise that lives in every frame of the movie. And people are like, oh, I'm so in awe of Chloe Zhao's passion and artistry, especially compared to those stupid superhero movies. I could not disagree more. I mean, maybe she feels it, but to me, it's not conveyed through the work. To me, it's a soulless affair. And I think you root for a character like Ajax, and of course, to a much lesser extent, Cersei and Druig, too, actually. And to a lesser extent, Phastos. You kind of get him too. But there's levels. Definitely Ajax the most. You kind of go, okay, so this is a moral compass here. And so toward the end of the movie, they're torn asunder and they're dying off. But when Icarus is shown in flashback to kill Ajax, they do something that really, really pissed me off. Something else is he goes back and he like plants her body at her farm. And that's where they find her earlier in the movie. And then he like cries and acts all angst ridden. And it's like, first of all, the actor's so bad that it's not believable. Second of all, the character is so bad, like, morally, destitute, that it's not believable. I hate when you set up a sociopathic character and then you give no indication that there's any dimension to them at all. And then all of a sudden, oh, we've got to humanize this guy or girl, but it's usually male characters, it seems. And it's like, a sociopath is a valid character type. I mean, you can humanize some, but they're still not. I mean, like Hannibal, the series humanizes Hannibal, but I mean, Hannibal never cries. I mean, he gets like affectionate toward Will. He's friendly, he has some life to him, unlike Icarus, but he never like goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so torn." That's not what sociopaths do. I didn't like that in Daredevil season 3. The only thing I didn't like about Daredevil season 3 was giving Bullseye this elaborate psychological backstory to try to make us sympathetic toward him, because that's not the Bullseye we know from the comics. The Bullseye we know basically just loves killing women. Well, he loves killing everybody, but he loves killing women, especially Daredevil's many girlfriends. And he laughs and giggles when he does it. That character's not in the show, unfortunately. But they made it work. I'm not going to totally knock it. So this is what they do again. They try to, at the last minute, the 11th hour, suddenly, oh, he's got a good side. And it's like, nah. I was watching and I'm like, no, I don't feel sorry for this clown. Anyway, shortly after that, he battles the Eternals, and then we're back to, yeah, he's a total dick. And he tries to murder all of them, including his ex-wife, Cersei. Actually, he gets Sprite to try to kill her, and Sprite stabs her in the side, not in a lethal area, but maybe she just doesn't know what she's doing. I don't know. Maybe she's never stabbed anybody before. But she has this kind of magical blade that Ajax had, and his blue and gold filigree, which is, Ajax colors. Yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, so they do the Unimind, they magnify their powers, and suddenly Cersei can change animate matter. And can she do it with the other characters' powers bolstering her? Can she do it on a large scale? And so she can't stop the emergence, because good old Icarus has shuttered their plans. They can't stop the emergence. They have a hard time even stopping him. They can't stop him, basically, but they do stop the emergence. Cersei turns the Celestial basically into a mountain as he's emerging from the earth. So that's kind of cool. Good effects in that part. So then old Icarus is all, woe is me, over Cersei, blah, blah. And he like, really a very Homelander, Man of Steel, like the arrogance and godlike, hubris of Homelander, and the faux angst of Cavill's Superman, an uneasy marriage of those two poles. He flies into the heart of the sun, and they show him, burning up, not really like graphic like Fulci or anything, like his skin peeling off and his bones sticking out. Though I would have been cheering for that, to be honest. He's really one of the most repellent characters that, to me, has been in a Marvel movie. Just not a good character on any way. Good as in not a good guy, and not a good actor, and not well written, not well thought out. Really, it's an agenda. It's a plot device to say, here's my point, Chloe Zhao's point, which is not like Kirby's point. So anyway, he's dead. Fuck it. The emergence has ended. So then we kind of the surviving Celestials. Eternals split off. Cersei and Dane hook up a little. I mean, they don't have sex, but I mean, they meet again. And, you know, so weird. Sprite goes with them. So Sprite like tried to kill Cersei, never apologized, and Cersei just acts like it never happened. That made me pissed off too. I thought now Sprite, they used the lingering cosmic power from the Unimind to turn Sprite into a human, so she can age. But she's like, "You will have a short lifespan." She's like, "That's okay. I'll have puberty." But Igris is dead. Fuck. Was it all worth it, Sprite? So for some reason they take her under their wing, and I'm like, why? Fastos and his family are back together. And Kingo is, just kind of good. Kingo, kind of silly, and he has a human friend who tags along for a lot of the movie, who's like filming. He wants to do a documentary on this. That could have been an interesting angle cinematically, but it just ended up becoming silly, like a joke thing. And the character was nice. He was a nice guy. He was, as far as I know, really, he was original to the comics. Because Kingo was Japanese originally, not Indian. But of course, he gets killed off by the deviants. Kingo's just kind of, whatever. So those three are kind of like hanging on Earth. And then Makari and Druig and Athena, and I hope I'm not forgetting someone. Those three characters take the Domo, and they're going to try to find other Eternals and tell them the truth and stop them from fucking up planets. So So Arishem is not thrilled about this. Now I'm going to say this. Hold on, I'm going to pause this 1 second. Remember how I talked about how implacable the Eternals were and impossible to read, and they don't speak and you don't see faces? Okay, so Arishem in the movie, he's red like Arishem, and he's really big. Okay, that's all he has in common with Arishem visually. His face is actually the face of a different Eternal named Ezon, and I don't know why they did that. And his body is all kind of, it looks less like Jack Kirby and more like a Rob Liefeld character, like a painfully distorted kind of character, like more like a horror movie kind of character, really awkward physical structure. I guess that's to make him seem more alien. I mean, he's giant, and he fucking talks. And it's like, oh, how can we get this across in exposition? We've got to have Ajax talk to the Eternal and then Cersei talk to the Eternal. When Ajax dies, she makes Cersei the Prime Eternal. So she's got the hotline to Arishem. Yo, Arishem! Well, good old Arishem, and this is an echo of the Thor comic solution to the fourth host leaving Earth. He takes Fastos and Kingo and Cersei from the Earth, and he's like, I want to absorb your knowledge of humanity and see why you felt like they deserved to live. I will read your minds and study this, and I will judge. So yeah, you finally have that. He's finally the judge. It took thousands and billions of years, but now Arishem's finally the judge. Before, he was more like the destroyer. Plant that seed, birth that celestial. Fuck this Earth and all these planets. I need more celestials, even though you never see any of them. Tiamat is the name of the one that was lodged inside the Earth, growing, and you do see Tiamat's head kind of come off before it turns to rock. This movie really has problems. So anyway, that's near the end, and then the three characters that are aboard the Domo. I like that plot. I like Makari. I like Druig. I like Athena. Am I forgetting someone? Let's see. Icarus is dead. Gilgamesh is dead. Ajax dead. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody. It's easy to forget some of these characters. Oh, Sprite is on Earth. Who cares? By herself, she's human. Okay, so of the 6 remaining Eternals, so 3 are taken away by Arishem indefinitely, and Dane's not too happy about this. missing his girl, and then the other three are aboard the Domo, and they run into this creature called Pip the Troll, which you guys, some of you comics guys, will know as one of Adam Warlock's sidekicks. He was created by Jim Starlin. He's kind of a sarcastic character. Of course, he's going to join the Guardians of the Galaxy because they love those kind of characters. James Gunn does, and the audiences do for those movies. I'm not among those audience members for those movies. They're not intended for me, I don't think. But Pip the Troll is perfect for that. And Pip and Gamora were friends in the comics, so they'll be friends in the movies, whatever. He's mostly CGI, but like Patton Oswalt plays him, and I'm done with that guy. I can't stand him. I can't stand his work or him as a person. But that's a tale for another day. But I get why they cast him, because he's an obnoxious dork who thinks he's funny, which so is Pip. So it was kind of good stunt casting. And then Pips introduces them to Arrow/Star Fox, played by Harry Styles, who I can't remember who he is. Apparently he's some super hot, famous guy, but I don't think he's acted before or not in movies. You guys can tell me. You'll all laugh at me for not knowing who he is. He's a millennial icon of some kind. I did know and I forgot because I didn't care. But anyway, here he is. And he's him and Pip both fairly resemble their comic counterparts. The same can be said of the Eternals. Their each character's individual signature colors is retained. Athena has her design, and Sprite has their same face. That's about where it is. Cersei has long black hair and green. And but that's it. They don't really look like the characters. Ajak kind of has an evocative outfit of Ajak in the comics. The designs for the comics for the costumes are terrible. They all look alike. It's clunky, kind of sort of quasi armor, and all of the designs are these crop circle designs, circles within circles and lines going this way. And yeah, I get it. Okay, that's also a reference to ancient astronauts and aliens. The crop circles are supposedly landing pads, but that's the only visual motif they use in the whole movie. Everywhere they live has those designs. Their powers come out in those designs. Their costumes have those designs all over them. And it's lazy when you're dealing with Jack Kirby. I mean, Black Panther won a production design Oscar, and part of it was for the Kirby. I mean, a lot of it was Afrofuturism, but some of it was the Kirby-inspired designs. And they're great in that movie. And in Thor Ragnarok, they're fantastic. Why Figa and Zhao said, yeah, fuck all this Kirby visual shit. We're going to make all our own shit up. When you have such a rich visual treasure trove to draw from, I mean, it's really a shame. It shows a cynicism that I kind of find appalling. Really like, nah. The good news is, Eternals made a pretty good amount of money, and some people love it, but critically, it had a difficult time. And rightfully so. And, it underperformed. And, essentially, Figa said, not long after the movie came out, or around the time the movie came out, it was making, its initial little burst of income, but getting a lot of critical backlash early on, even before it came out from previews, seen by critics. And he was like, okay, there will not be an Eternal sequel. We're just going to use some of these characters. It's like a springboard to move things along. It's like, thank God. Kind of like the Incredible Hulk was, Incredible Hulk sucked, and rightfully there were no sequels. And that really has nothing to do with Incredible Hulk Banner character. But I do think Norton's... we won't get into that. That's a whole other thing. So, yeah. So I'm curious to see what happened to the Domo characters. I'm assuming... I think I'm correct in assuming that those 5 characters aboard the Domo will meet the Guardians of the Galaxy. So their story will go into Volume 3. I don't know what's going to happen to Cersei, Faustus, and Kingo. For all I care, Kingo can get obliterated. Faustus is kind of cool. It'd be kind of cool if Cersei joined the Avengers and reunited with Dane when he becomes an Avenger, because he invariably will, because here is the end credit stuff we all used to. So, end credits. So what are they? Yeah. One's the Domo, and they see Star Fox. So the very, very, very end, You see Dane Whitman, and he's at his ancestral castle. So he kind of hints that he has a complicated family history and that it involves some kind of weird paranormal shit. He says to Cersei before she's whisked away at the end that he found this out while she was away, and I forgot that actor's name right for the second. He's pretty good. I know he's a popular actor. He's fine. He's good. I think he'll be good as Dane. And making Dane, originally in the comics, Dane Whitman was the American nephew of a villainous Black Knight who was British named Nathan Garrett. And he had this castle, and he was descended from the Arthurian Black Knight Sir Percy of Scandia, who was a early Silver Age Marvel comic character who took place in that period, had art by Joe Maneely. Cool stuff. And so, the villainous Black Knight who was created by Kirby was really going nowhere. So Roy Thomas, bumped him off and had Dane come in Avengers 47. First Dane comes in, and then he inherits the castle. And then number 48, he's on the cover, and he's on the winged horse that had belonged to Nathan Garrett, his uncle. And he's the new Black Knight, and he's a hero. And he ends up joining the Avengers, I think in issue 71, but he only kind of pops up here and there. And he mainly hangs out in England, even though he is American. And he's kind of a scientist too, like his uncle. So I don't think this guy's going to be a scientist, but he's cool. I think he'll be good in the Avengers. I don't know what the Black Knight will look like. I hope cool. But his end credit sequence is he's at the castle and he's going through all these artifacts. And he has this long box, and it has this crest with kind of an eagle or kind of a dragon, eagle, griffin like thing. It's the same symbol exactly that's on the Black Knight's costume in the comics. It's within a red circle, this creature. So I was like, cool. And they open it up, and it's the Ebony Blade, which he has in the comics. And I think Roy took the idea of the Ebony Blade for Black Knight from Stormbringer, from Elric, from Michael Moorcock's books, who Roy brought into the Marvel Universe via Conan. Conan and Elric had this killer team up. It's a multiversal thing, though. Elric doesn't live within the Marvel Universe like Conan. He came from another universe adjacent. But anyway, he's in the continuity. Elric probably has an entry in Marvel Nap. And he brought with him some characters. Well, a character Kulan Goth, who Marvel owns, who's kind of cool. But yeah, I think Roy based the idea of the Ebony Blade. I mean, he introduced Black Knight well before the Conan Elric thing. But so I think, he didn't know if he'd ever really do the real Elric, who he's a fan of. But he, I'm going to have an Ebony Blade. And he, alludes from time to time that the Ebony Blade has this curse on it. And it's nothing like Elric, though. It doesn't like steal souls. And they don't do much with that idea for a long, long time. And then they finally start exploring it more in the 90s and 2000s. And he becomes a core, instead of just periodically appearing as an Avenger or a Defender, as in the 60s and 70s. In the 80s and 90s, he's a core Avenger. And he's really good. And he's really one of the highlights. He's kind of kind of an empathetic, kind of everyman, kind of white dude with a cursed sword. Likable, smart, but has kind of a quirky side to him. He's definitely fallible. He's not he's not an arrogant character, and I feel like that's where they'll go with this character from what I'm seeing. So what he does, he sees the sword, and it starts kind of and then somebody says to him off camera, I'm totally paraphrasing. Basically, you need to be careful with a blade like that or a weapon like that. Maybe he doesn't say blade. That would maybe too on the nose. Because I learned the voice is that of Marshall Ali, who's playing Blade in the MCU. So that is Blade talking to Dane Whitman. Now, why is Blade seeking out Dane Whitman? Or is Blade just seeking out the Ebony Blade to use against vampires? So I kept thinking, when will he become the Black Knight in an Avengers movie? Or he's not going to have a solo movie. So I kind of feel like they'll kind of like roll his story into Blade's movie. And then they'll both join the Avengers. I don't know if Blade will join the Avengers or not. I mean, he finally did in the comics, which I didn't like. The new next Avengers 5, whenever it happens, is going to have a really different and very cool lineup. I mean, they're not going to retain many people. I'm assuming Hulk. I may be wrong. I'm assuming Hulk and certainly Captain Marvel. Anybody else alive? Scarlet Witch, I doubt she'll go back, or Vision, but maybe, you never know. Thor, I don't know. But you know, we already know some of the people who will be in it. So yeah. So this is my long, torturous review of Eternals. I'm sorry it was so torturous for you guys. Watching the movie was torturous for me. I tried to like it, and I failed. Maybe the movie failed me. I tried to meet it halfway, and it was every time I got in there, and I'm like, oh, Ajax, or this is Druid's kind of cool, or this kind of effect is kind of cool, or oh, there's the Black Knight, you know, and then it'd be like pulled, you know, sucked back into this vortex, this black maw of mediocrity and lame brained ideas, half baked ideas that were assembled like, you know, patchwork from all these different Eternals comics, except a little bit, but mostly not the Kirby ones. And when Eternals was going to debut on January 12th on Disney Plus, which is when and how I saw it, a few days before, Chloe Zhao did this weird Twitter graphic, like a drawing or whatever of Eternals, and you know, it was like mentioning Rotten Tomatoes gave it like a 50 or 56% rating, and she was sore about it. So she did that graphic, and then she said, it wrote, Rotten Tomatoes is wrong. And that was it. And it's like, first of all, that's a lame rebuttal. Just saying they're wrong, and you're going to put it on Twitter so millions of people will see it, but who cares? You're not explaining why they're wrong. You're certainly not proving them wrong. We're not getting a different cut on the Disney Plus. You're not improving anything. And it's just so juvenile. You know, it really shows somebody with an ego problem. And maybe she has vision, and maybe her other movies like Nomadland and then going forward do have a vision. I haven't seen any of her stuff besides Eternals. She doesn't have much. But her vision for Eternals it's a fractured vision. It's not coherent. It's not cohesive. Really doesn't advance the MCU much, except to introduce some possible new supporting characters or Avengers. Yeah, it's really, and you know, a lot of the stuff in it, you keep having to ask yourself, you know, why wasn't any of this mentioned in the previous movies? All this cosmic stuff. And of course, on Earth, you know, they're asked that, and you know, Ajax like, we were told not to interfere with anyone except by fighting the deviants. Then the deviants were gone, our mission was over, we were dispersed. They also reveal, by the way, that Arishem did create the deviants after all, in outer space, also. And when their powers get unlocked, like Cersei can suddenly affect animate matter, one of the deviants absorbs some of this power and becomes sentient. That's how we get Crow. And Crow does meet Athena, but he kills her. So yeah, so that's their dalliance there. I don't know if Crow escaped or not. I think they destroyed all the deviants. I can't remember. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyway, if you loved the movie, my apologies. Not for what I'm saying, because I think I'm legitimate here. I think this is a legit set of grievances. But I'm sorry for you that, I mean, not that you like it, that's cool. But I'm sorry that you didn't have a better product. And I'm sorry that you're being given a concept that was really cool and interesting by a brilliant the most groundbreaking creator in superhero comics in America ever. And given this kind of boulder, I can never pronounce this word, boulderized version, that's okay. A lot of people won't care. And so, you know, as long as it makes money, it's cool. Yeah. So that's it for me. I finally got on my chest. I'm going to do my absolute damnedest to never do a video on BLU Review over an hour ever again. That's kind of a pledge. I knew this was going to be long, and yeah, it's one of my long. So apologies for that. Thank you for all the subscribers. Thank you for the channel patrons. Thank you for supporting me. Please, please, please hit like, subscribe. Feel free to donate to my PayPal, because I have like no money right now. And feel free to shop at my eBay store. I've got tons of incredible shit. and I'm willing to haggle with you, wheel and deal. All these links are below. So thanks a lot. Rock on.